I shot up in bed, my heart hammering against my ribs, gasping for air. Sam was gone again. The clock on my nightstand glowed to 13 a.m. in angry red digits. I scrambled to my feet, barely remembering to grab my robe as I bolted toward the back door. It stood wide open, swaying slightly in the chilly night breeze. My hands shook as I flicked the porch light on, scanning the yard. No sign of Sam, just like the night before. And the night before that, Sam, my golden retriever, had been vanishing every single night. I'd wake to find the door ajar, his bed empty, my pulse roaring in my ears. The first time, I thought I'd forgotten to lock up. The second time, I blamed myself for not latching it properly. But now, after 5 nights in a row, I knew something was wrong. I had locked the door. I'd checked it twice. Yet somehow, Sam kept slipping out. I rushed back inside and grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer. My backyard stretched into a dense thicket of trees, swallowed by shadows. Stepping onto the damp grass, I swept the beam over bushes, the fence line, the towering oaks. Nothing. Just silence. Sam. My voice cut through the stillness. No answering bark, no rustle of leaves, just the distant hum of crickets and the occasional mournful hoot of an owl. A cold knot of dread coiled in my stomach. If Sam wasn't running away, where was he going? The next morning, Sam trotted back inside just before dawn, panting happily like nothing had happened. That's when I decided Di was setting up a camera. The guy at the electronics store smirked as he rang up the night vision. Camera. Catching raccoons. I forced a laugh. Something like that. No way was I telling a stranger my dog was vanishing through locked doors, like some kind of ghost. He'd think I was insane. Maybe I was. That night, I positioned the camera in the living room, aimed squarely at the back door, double-checked the lock, double-checked the camera. Everything was set. Sleep didn't come easy. I drifted in and out, my nerves frayed. Until 2:13 a.m., I jolted awake. The house was silent, but something prickled at the back of my neck. I grabbed my phone and pulled up the camera feed, and there he was. Sam stood at the back door, ears pricked, body rigid. Then the door swung open. Not just a creak, not just the wind. It opened for him, deliberate and smooth. My blood turned to ice. Sam wagged his tail and trotted outside like he'd been invited. I was out of bed in an instant, sprinting to the door. It hung wide open again. No broken lock, no forced entry, just open. I grabbed the flashlight and stepped into the night, my bare feet sinking into the dew-soaked grass. Sam, my voice sounded small, swallowed by the dark. Then I saw him in the clearing beyond the trees. Sam sat perfectly still, facing someone, a boy no older than 10, kneeling in the dirt, his hands buried in Sam's fur. He looked up as I approached, his eyes widening like a spooked deer. Wait, I started, but the boy was already running, vanishing into the woods like smoke. Sam trotted back to me, tail wagging as if nothing were wrong. I crouched, running a hand through his fur. Who was that, buddy? Sam just licked my hand, his warm brown eyes full of secrets. I glanced back at the trees, my pulse pounding. This was only the beginning. I barely slept the rest of the night. My mind raced. Who was that boy? Why was Sam meeting him? And how was my door opening on its own? By morning, I was exhausted but determined. If Sam was sneaking out to see that kid, I needed to know why. After gulping down a strong coffee, I called out of work, Sam whined as I clipped the leash to his collar. He'd gotten used to his freedom these past few nights, and he wasn't happy about the restraint. But I needed answers. We walked toward the clearing where I'd seen the boy. The morning air was crisp, the grass still damp underfoot. Sam tugged eagerly, his tail high. He knew exactly where he was going. 10 minutes into the woods, Sam stopped dead. His ears perked, and he let out a soft whine. That's when I saw it. A makeshift shelter. Just a few planks and a tarp wedged between two trees, but enough to tell me someone had been living there. My chest tightened. Had that boy been out here alone all this time? I knelt beside Sam. Is this where you've been going? Sam licked my hand in response. Carefully, I stepped closer. Hello, is anyone here? Silence. Inside, I found a crumpled blanket, an empty water bottle, and a few granola bar wrappers. My gut twisted. This wasn't just some kid playing in the woods. He was surviving out here. As I turned to leave, something caught my Arja photo, half buried in the dirt. I brushed the soil away, and my breath hitched. A family, a man, a woman, and a little boy, grinning at the camera, arms wrapped around each other. The boy couldn't have been more than 5 or 6, but I recognized his eyes. The boy from the clearing. I tucked the photo into my pocket, my mind spinning. Come on, Sam, let's go home. Calling the police felt like the obvious choice, but what if the boy ran? What if he was scared of them? He'd bolted the second he saw me. He didn't trust adults. I needed to earn his trust first. That night, I didn't set up the camera. Instead, I waited in the dark by the back door, watching. Sam paced restlessly, shooting me confused glances. Then just, like clockwork, 2:13 a.m. Sam's ears perked. The door creaked open. This time, I followed. The woods were alive with shadows, but Sam moved with purpose, leading me straight to the shelter. And there he was, the boy crouched in the dirt, his fingers tangled in Sam's fur. When he saw me, he froze. I held up my hands. Hey, it's okay. I'm not here to hurt you. The boy didn't move, but Sam wagged his tail, nudging the kid's hand like a peace offering. My name's Nate, I said softly. This is Sam. I think he likes you. The boy swallowed hard. Hey, she comes to me every night. I nodded. Yeah, I noticed. I took a careful step closer. Why? The boy hesitated. Then, so quietly, I almost missed it. Because I'm alone, and he knows. His words hit me like a punch to the gut. The boy fin wouldn't meet my eyes. His fingers clutched Sam's fur like an anchor. His shoulders hunched as if bracing for a blow. The moonlight caught the dirt smudged on his cheeks, the frayed edges of his too-thin jacket. Up close, he looked even younger. 10, maybe 11. A kid who should have been worrying about homework, not surviving in the woods. You don't have anywhere to go, I said carefully. It wasn't a question. Finn shook his head, his gaze fixed on the ground. Not anymore. The words hung between us, heavy with things unsaid. I crouched a few feet away, giving him space. Sam flopped down between us, his tail thumping against the dirt like a metronome of comfort. Do you have a name? I asked. A pause. Then, so quiet the wind nearly stole it. Finn. I let the name settle in my mind. Do you mind if I sit with you? He hesitated, then gave the tiniest nod. We sat in silence for a long moment. The only sounds, Sam's contented sighs, and the rustle of leaves overhead. Finn's breathing was shallow, like he'd forgotten how to take a full breath. How long have you been out here? I finally asked. since summer. His voice was rough, unused months. My chest ached. Have you been eating? A shrug. Gas stations? Sometimes people leave food at the park. I exhaled slowly, trying to keep my voice steady. Finn, you don't have to stay out here. I can help you. His head snapped up, eyes wide with panic. I don't need help. I know, I said quickly. But you don't have to be alone. You don't have to be scared. Finn's jaw tightened. I'm not going back. Back where? He shook his head violently, his hands fisting in Sam's fur. Foster care, a bad home. I didn't push, not yet. Okay, I said softly, but it's getting colder. At least let me bring you some food. Clean clothes. Finn studied me like he was trying to see past my words, to the catch beneath the offer. Finally, he gave the smallest nod. Relief flooded through me. I'll come back tomorrow, and I promise Sai won't tell anyone where you are, Sam. Wind as I stood, as if protesting the end of this strange midnight meeting. Finn didn't say goodbye, but he didn't run either. He just watched me leave, his small frame swallowed by the shadows. The next morning, I packed a bag carefully, as if preparing for some fragile expedition. The thermos of chicken soup, my mother's recipe that always seemed to heal everything, went in first, wrapped in one of my thickest sweaters to stay warm. I added a wool blanket, the soft blue one from the guest room closet, and tucked in a few protein bars for good measure. My hands hesitated over the first aid kit before I threw that in too, along with an extra pair of socks. Sam watched the whole process with his tail thumping against the floor, his intelligent eyes tracking every movement. When I picked up the leash, Sam practically vibrated with excitement, dancing in tight circles by the door. His enthusiasm was contagious, but as we stepped outside, a thread of unease wound through me. What if Finn had changed his mind? What if he'd decided the risk of trusting me wasn't worth it? The walk to the clearing felt longer than yesterday. Autumn leaves crunched underfoot, and the morning sun filtered weakly through the thinning canopy. Sam pulled ahead eagerly, his nose working overtime as we neared the shelter. But when we arrived, the space between the trees was empty. My stomach dropped like a stone. The makeshift shelter still stood, but the tarp hung limp, the space beneath it conspicuously vacant. Only the crumpled granola bar wrappers from yesterday remained, fluttering slightly in the breeze. Had I pushed too hard, moved too fast? Maybe last night's tentative connection had been nothing more than desperation on Finn's part. A momentary weakness in the face of hot food and a kind voice. Then Sam let out a sharp, urgent bark and lunged toward the denser woods, his nose pressed to the ground. His whole body quivered with purpose as he followed an invisible trail. Finn, I called, hurrying after Sam. My voice sounded too loud in the quiet forest. It's Nate. I brought more food. A flicker of movement between the oaks ahead. A flash of faded denim. The pale oval of a face, half hidden behind a tree trunk. Then nothing. Wait, please. I stopped where I was, holding up the bag like a peace offering. I'm not here to make you do anything. I just... I brought soup and a sweater. It's supposed to get cold tonight. Silence. Even Sam had gone still. Though his ears were pricked forward, his body angled toward where Finn had disappeared. Then, so quiet I almost missed it, the crunch of a footstep on dry leaves. Finn emerged, slowly from behind a massive oak, his shoulders hunched defensively, his hands clenched into tight fists at his sides. His eyes darted between me and the trees behind him, calculating escape routes. Sam broke the standoff, With a happy woof, he bounded forward and nudged Finn's clenched fingers with his wet nose. The boy flinched at first, but as Sam persisted, whining softly and pressing his head against Finn's thigh, I saw the tension leak from his narrow shoulders. Finn sank to his knees in the leaf litter, burying his face in Sam's fur like it was the only safe place in the world. I approached slowly, keeping my movements visible, and set the bag down between us. "You don't have to run," I said softly. "I meant what I said yesterday." Finn peeked up from Sam's golden fur, his eyes red-rimmed and wary. "You came back," he whispered, as if he couldn't quite believe it. "I told you I would." I nudged the bag closer with my foot. "Soup's still hot if you want some." He stared at the thermos like it might bite him, his fingers twitching at his sides. Hunger won out over caution. When he reached for it, I noticed how his hands shook, whether from cold or exhaustion or something deeper, I couldn't tell. The first sips seemed to startle him. His breath hitched audibly, and for a terrible moment I thought he might cry. But he just swallowed hard and took another sip, then another, his throat working desperately. It was the way someone eats when they've gone too long without, when the memory of warmth is almost foreign. "I'm not going back to them," he muttered between gulps, his voice rough. The thermos trembled in his grip. Them. I kept my tone neutral, careful not to spook him. Finn's knuckles whitened around the thermos. Foster homes. A bitter pause. They WEREN, single quotes, T. Nice. The way he said it, flat metal fact. Like this was simply how the world worked. Made my throat tighten. I'd heard enough stories about the system to read between the lines. Kids treated like inconveniences rather than people. Houses that provided roofs but never homes. Nights spent listening for footsteps in the hallway, for the creak of a door that might mean trouble. "You don't have to go back," I said carefully, watching Sam lean his full weight against Finn's side. "But you can't stay out here forever, Finn. It's not safe. I've got an extra room. You could stay there, just until we figure things out." Finn's head jerked up so fast I heard his neck pop. "Why?" he demanded, but the anger in his voice didn't match the lost look in his eyes. The question wasn't defensive. It was raw, bewildered. Like kindness was a language he'd stopped trying to understand, a currency he no longer believed in. I nodded to Sam, who had now sprawled across Finn's lap like a furry weighted blanket. "Because he loves you," I said simply, "and because no kid should have to sleep in the woods when there's a warm bed waiting." Finn looked down at Sam, his fingers tracing the velvety edge of the dog's ear with unconscious tenderness. Something fragile flickered across his face. Hope. Maybe. Or just the exhaustion of carrying so much fear for so long. "Can Sam sleep in my room?" he asked finally, so quiet I had to lean forward to hear. The first crack in the wall. The first tentative hand reaching back. "Yeah," I said, letting my smile bloom slow and easy so as not to scare him off. "Of course he can." Finn took a shaky breath. That seemed to come from the very bottom of his lungs. Then, so quiet the wind nearly stole the word away, "Okay." The syllable hung between us, delicate as a soap bubble. I didn't move, didn't speak, afraid any sudden motion might make him take it back. Sam, ever the peacemaker, chose that moment to lick Finn's cheek enthusiastically, making the boy grimace and swat half-heartedly at him. "Come on," I said, standing slowly and brushing leaves from my knees. "Let's go home." And when Finn stood up, when he took that first step toward me, toward the life waiting beyond these woods, I knew nothing would ever be the same again. Finn stood frozen at the back door, his fingers twisting in the sleeves of his new sweater like he was trying to anchor himself to something solid. The fabric was too big on his narrow frame. I'd guessed at the size when I bought it, and the covers fell past his fingertips, swallowing his hands whole. Sam nudged at those hidden fingers with his wet nose, his tail beating a steady rhythm against the door frame, as if to say, "It's okay, you're okay. You don't have to come in," I said, keeping my voice low and even. "But it's warmer inside." Finn's gaze darted from me to Sam and back again, his breathing shallow. A leaf clung stubbornly to his matted hair, a last remnant of the woods he'd called home for months. When he finally moved, it wasn't a step so much as a slow, deliberate transfer of weight. First his toes touching the linoleum, then his whole foot settling gingerly, as if testing for traps. The threshold might as well have been a canyon. The overhead light flickered to life, and Finn recoiled like he'd been struck, throwing up an arm to shield his eyes. In that harsh fluorescence, I saw what the forest shadows had hidden, the sharp angles of his underfed frame. The dirt ground into his skin like a second layer, the way his collarbones protruded sharply above the sweater's neckline. His eyes swept the room in quick, assessing darts. The back door, the window over the sink, the hallway leading to the front, mapping exits instinctively. "Thirsty?" I asked, moving slowly toward the fridge. "I've got juice, water," Finn whispered, the word cracking like dry kindling. His throat worked as he spoke, as if even that single syllable cost him something precious. The glass trembled, slightly, in my hand as I filled it. When I held it out, Finn approached with the caution of a wild animal at a watering hole. He took it with both hands, his fingers brushing mine for the briefest moment before jerking away. For a long second, he just stared at the water's surface, watching the way it caught the light, his reflection warping in the ripples. There was something sacred in his hesitation, like he was waiting for the mirage to dissolve. "You don't have to ask for things here," I said, leaning back against the counter to give him space. "This is your home too." Finn's eyes flicked to mine, searching for the lie. Finding none, he raised the glass with both hands like a communion cup and drank. The first sip made him gasp, cold and clean, nothing like the metallic temps of creek water. He drank greedily then, water slopping down his chin, his throat working in desperate gulps until the glass was empty. Sam, ever the intuitive one, chose that moment to flop dramatically across Finn's feet with a contented sigh. The sudden weight made Finn stiffen, but as Sam's warmth seeped through the fabric of his borrowed socks, I saw the tension in his shoulders ease. Just a fraction, just enough. The guest room waited down the hall. I'd changed the sheets that morning, though they'd been clean already, and opened the window to air out the space. Finn hovered in the doorway, his breath coming in uneven hitches as he took in the bed. The dresser, the rectangle of backyard visible through the curtains. His fingers plucked nervously at his sweater cuffs. "It's not much," I started. "It's clean," Finn blurted, then immediately clamped a hand over his mouth, his cheeks flushing. The unspoken comparison hung between us. The musty shelters and bus station, bathrooms, the places where clean was never guaranteed. My heart ached like a fresh bruise. "Sam can sleep right here," I said, patting the foot of the bed where I'd laid out an old quilt. "If you want." Finn reached out with one tentative finger, brushing the blanket's surface as if expecting his hand to pass straight through. The fabric held. His breath caught when it did. Dinner was quiet. Finn ate like each bite might be his last. Fast and methodical, his eyes darting up whenever I moved, his body angled slightly away like he was preparing to run. But he ate everything on his plate, and when I offered seconds, he didn't refuse, just nodded with his eyes fixed firmly on the table. That night, as I passed Finn's door on the way to my own room, I left it cracked open, just enough to let the hallway light spill in, just enough so he wouldn't feel trapped. The house settled around us with its familiar creaks and sighs, and for a long while there was only silence. Then, so faint, I had to hold my breath to hear it. "This is real, right?" Finn's voice, barely more than a whisper, shaky with wonder. Not to me, to Sam. A child's plea for reassurance in the dark. "You're really here." A soft thump as Sam's tail hit. The mattress in answer. The sound that followed might have been a sob, or maybe just the house settling. I walked away before I could be sure, giving them their moment. Some truths are too fragile to be witnessed. The morning light filtered through the kitchen curtains as I woke to the sound of clinking dishes. Finn stood frozen at the counter, clutching a bowl of cereal like he'd been caught committing some grand theft. The milk sloshed slightly as he tensed. I didn't want to wake you," he mumbled, shoulders hunched defensively. "You didn't," I said automatically, masking my surprise at finding him rummaging through my kitchen at dawn. The boy still moved through the house like a ghost some days, as if expecting to be scolded for existing. "Help yourself to anything." He nodded, taking a cautious bite. The shadows under his eyes were still there, but lighter than when he'd first. Arrived less like bruises and more like ordinary teenage exhaustion. His hair stuck up in the back from sleep, and he wore the oversized NASA t-shirt I dug out of a donation box last week. "Do you like pancakes?" I asked, already pulling out the mixing bowl from the cupboard. Finn's head tilted slightly, considering. "I used to." There was something heartbreaking in the way he said it, like he'd forgotten simple pleasures could belong to him too. "So I made them." Flour dusted the counter as I whisked the batter, cracking eggs one-handed the way my grandmother had taught me. Finn watched silently from the kitchen table, fingers tracing the wood grain. When I slid a stack onto his plate, golden brown with crispy edges, just how I liked them, he didn't hesitate. He devoured them, syrup dripping onto his sleeve, and, for the first time since he'd come to stay with Mitha, corner of his mouth twitched, almost smiled. Weeks passed, and Finn began carving out spaces for himself, both in the house and in my life. His library books piled up on the coffee table. A second toothbrush appeared in the bathroom. The NASA shirt became a permanent fixture, worn soft from washing. He still moved like a shadow sometimes, quiet and careful, but the hollows under his eyes softened. He ate breakfast at the table now, not like a tentative guest, but like someone who belonged there. One evening, as I scrubbed at a stubborn bit of cheese stuck to a dinner plate, Finn lingered by the counter. His fingers tapped restlessly against the cover of Treasure Island, his third library book this week. Sam sprawled at his feet, the dog's tail thumping whenever Finn absent-mindedly scratched behind his ears. "You ever fix things with your dad?" Finn asked suddenly. The question caught me mid-scrub. I set the plate down carefully, watching soap bubbles slide down the porcelain. "Not really," I admitted. "He wasn't around much." Finn frowned, not looking up from where his thumb worried at the book's dog-eared corner. "But you stopped waiting for him to change." It wasn't a question. It was an observation, sharp and quiet as a knife between the ribs. "Yeah," I said, turning the water off. The kitchen suddenly felt too still. At some point, you realize you can't keep looking back. Finn's gaze dropped to Sam, who rolled onto his back in immediate expectation of belly rubs. I don't know if I can do that. You don't have to do it all at once. He nodded, but his fingers tightened around the book until his knuckles whitened. I didn't push. Some wounds needed air more than bandages. Later that night, the creak of a door pulled me from sleep. Finn stood in the hallway, silhouetted by the nightlight he'd started leaving Anna's small rebellion against the dark. Sam sat, alert, at his feet, ears pricked forward. "Can't sleep?" I asked, rubbing my face. Finn shook his head. His voice came out thin. "The door, ... It's still doing it. Opening by itself." A chill prickled my neck. I'd hoped the phenomenon would stop once Finn was inside, safe. But some nights, I'd still wake to find it wide open. Sam sitting patiently on the threshold, waiting, watching, like something had called him there. Finn's voice dropped to a whisper. "You think it's her, Molly, his dog, the one he'd been forced to leave behind when they took him away, the one he still dreamed about, if his nighttime murmurs were anything to go by?" I swallowed hard. "I don't know." Moonlight caught the sheen in Finn's eyes as he chewed his lip. Then, so quiet I almost missed it. "I want to find her." The words hung between us, fragile as a soap bubble. Sam whined softly, pressing his cold nose against Finn's palm. Outside, the wind rattled the old oak tree against the house, its branches scraping the siding like persistent fingers. Somewhere beyond our walls, a dog barked just one sound. The sound curled round my heart like a question. The morning of our trip to the shelter, Finn was already dressed before I woke up, wearing the same clothes he'd arrived in months ago, now freshly washed. He stood by the front door with Sam pressed against his legs, the old photograph of Molly clutched in his hands like a talisman. The edges were frayed from months of handling, the colors faded to sepia tones, but you could still make out the joyful grin on young Finn's face as he hugged his scruffy mutt. "You ready?" I asked, jingling the truck keys. Finn nodded too quickly, his throat working as he swallowed. Sam whined and nudged his hand, leaving damp streaks across the photo. The drive stretched longer than the map suggested. Finn sat rigid in the passenger seat, the photograph now carefully tucked into his chest pocket, right over his heart. His knee bounced incessantly, rattling the loose change in the cue folder. Every few minutes, his fingers would creep up, too, touch the pocket as if reassuring himself the picture was still there. Sam, ever the peacemaker, wedged himself between us and rested his heavy head on Finn's lap. The steady weight seemed to ground the boy somewhat, his fingers finding their way into Sam's golden fur, twisting the strands absently. "Think she'll look the same?" Finn asked suddenly as we passed the town limits sign. His voice was small, the question of a child trying not to hope too hard. I kept my eyes on the road. Dogs change less than people do. The shelter parking lot was nearly empty on a weekday morning. Finn hesitated with his hand on the door handle, his breathing quick and shallow. Sam licked his cheek, which earned a half-hearted shove. "Okay, Finn," whispered, more to himself than us. Okay, the reception area smelled of antiseptic and kibble. A woman with silver-streaked hair and laugh lines around her eyes looked up from her computer. "Help you folks." Finn opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His fingers dug into Sam's collar. "We're looking for information about a dog," I said, resting a hand on Finn's shoulder. "Molly, brown and white terrier mix." The woman, her namatag Red Diane, studied Finn's tense expression, then smiled gently. Let me check our records. The keyboard clicks seemed absurdly loud in the quiet room. Finn's gaze darted around, taking in the bulletin board of adoption success stories, the donation jar, the faded paw print decals on the walls. His breathing hitched when Diane turned back to us. Molly, ... Yes, she came to us last August. Sweet girl, she was adopted in October by a lovely family. Finn's face crumpled, but Diane continued quickly. But I can give you their contact information if you'd like. The Harrisons are wonderful people. They'd understand. Finn's hands shook as he took the slip of paper Diane offered. The numbers blurred as his vision swam with unshed tears. He stared at it like it might burst into flames, like it held both salvation and ruin. Outside in the parking lot, the autumn sun felt too bright, too cheerful for the moment. Finn leaned against the truck bed, the paper trembling in his grip. Sam pressed close, whining softly. What if? Finn's voice broke. He cleared his throat and tried again. What if she doesn't remember me? The question hung between us, weighted with all the other unspoken fears, that Molly had replaced him, that she was happier now, that he'd failed her by leaving. I turned him to face me, waiting until his wild, scared eyes met mine. Dogs don't forget, Finn. I tapped the photo in his pocket. She still dreams about you, I guarantee it. Finn's breath came out in a shuddering wave. He looked down at the phone number again, his thumb tracing the digits Diane had written with such care. Can we call them now? My phone felt heavy as I pulled it out. Finn recited the number in a monotone, his fingers twisting in Sam's fur for courage. The ringtone seemed to go on forever. Then, hello. A woman's voice, warm and slightly out of breath. In the background, the high-pitched bark of a small dog. Finn's eyes went wide. His mouth worked silently. I took the phone gently. Hi, is this Mrs. Harrison? My name is Nate. I'm calling from the county animal shelter. We're trying to reconnect. A dog named Molly with her original owner. ... The conversation flowed around Finn as he stood frozen, every muscle taut. When I finally hung up, his gaze locked onto mine, desperate and afraid. They're expecting us, I said. She says Molly still sleeps with that red bandana you gave her. Finn made a sound like he'd been punched, his hands flying to cover his mouth. Tears spilled over, carving tracks through the dust on his face. Sam licked them away diligently as Finn gasped into his fur. Hey, I crouched to his level. She remembers, Finn. She never stopped. The drive to the Harrisons' house passed in a blur of quiet sniffles and nervous fidgeting. Finn alternated between staring blankly out the window and fussing with his shirt collar, his legs jiggling with restless energy. By the time we pulled up to the neat blue house with its white picket fence, his breathing had gone shallow and rapid. You okay? I asked, killing the engine. Finn didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the house, on the movement behind the front window. Then, a flash of brown and white fur darting past the glass. Finn was out of the truck before I could stop him, sprinting up the walkway with Sam barking excitedly at his heels. The front door swung open just as Finn reached the porch steps, and then Molly was there. Older, a little grayer around the muzzle, but undeniably herself. She froze for one heartbeat, two, her nose twitching madly. Finn dropped to his knees. Molly, his voice shattered on the word. The sound of her name, in that voice, that particular pitch she hadn't heard in years, triggered something primal. Molly launched herself at Finn with a yelp that was half joy, half fake. knocking him backward onto the grass. She covered his face in frantic kisses, her entire body wriggling with unrestrained euphoria, whining high in her throat between licks. Finn sobbed openly, burying his face in her fur, his fingers finding the familiar spot behind her left ear that always made her back leg twitch. It still did. Molly pawed at his chest, nosing at his pocket where the photograph rested, as if to say, "You kept it to Dot." Mrs. Harrison wiped her eyes with a tissue. "She's waited for you," she murmured. "Every night at the door, just watching." Finn looked up then, his arms still wrapped tight around Molly, his expression equal parts hope and terror. "Can I?" Mrs. Harrison nodded before he could finish. "She's yours. She always was." And in that moment, with Molly's weight solid and warm in his arms, with Sam panting happily beside them, Finn finally understood what home could feel like. The Harrison's house stood at the end of the cul-de-sac, like something from a storybook. Its pale blue siding faded by years of sunlight, but still radiating warmth. The white picket fence bore the marks of a well-loved home, faint crayon scribbles near the gatepost, a section where the paint was worn smooth from generations of hands resting there while waiting for the school bus. Finn froze at that gate, his fingers gripping the latch so tight his knuckles turned bone white. The last time he'd seen Molly, she'd been whining in the back of a stranger's car while caseworkers pulled him in the opposite direction. What if she didn't remember? What if she was happier here? Then movement, a golden brown streak exploded. From behind the hydrangea bushes, a scruffy terrier mix with one ear that flopped permanently sideways from an old injury. Time seemed to fracture as Molly skidded to a halt, her entire body locking onto Finn with laser focus. For one heart-stopping second, nothing moved. Not the wind in the oak trees, not the curtain fluttering in the Harrison's window, not even Finn's ragged breathing. Recognition hit like lightning. Molly's first joyful bark shattered the stillness, so loud it startled birds from the neighbor's roof. Finn barely had time to drop to his knees before 20 pounds of ecstatic dog launched into his chest, knocking him backward onto the sun-warmed grass. She was everywhere at once, licking his chin, pawing at his shoulders, sniffing frantically at his hair like she needed to confirm every inch of him was real. Her entire back end wiggled with the force of her tail's wagging, stirring up dandelion fluff that floated around them like celebratory confetti. Finn didn't speak, couldn't. His hands moved of their own accord, one burying itself in the familiar. Scruff behind Molly's collar where the fur grew thickest, the other cradling her ribcage to feel the frantic rabbit-quick beat of her heart. When he pressed his face into her neck, the scent of lavender shampoo mixed with something deeper, something uniquely Molly. The earthy smell of her paws after rain, the faint metallic tense of her old license tags. His shoulders shook with silent sobs that made Molly pause her frantic kisses to nudge worriedly at his cheek with her wet nose. Mrs. Harrison stood on the porch, clutching a dish towel to her chest, tears tracking silently down her round cheeks. "She never took to the dog bed we bought," she said, when she finally trusted her voice enough to speak. "Always slept right by the front door, like she was keeping watch." Finn looked up then, his face streaked with dirt and tears, one hand still, compulsively stroking Molly's side as if to reassure himself she wouldn't vanish. The dog had now discovered the photograph in his pocket, the crumpled Polaroid of the two of them taken outside their old apartment building, and was sniffing it with intense interest before licking Finn's wrist as if to say, "See, I knew you'd come back." When Mrs. Harrison knelt beside them, her knees popped audibly. Molly immediately wiggled over to lick her hand, too, tail never stopping its metronome beat against Finn's leg. "She's yours," the woman said simply, scratching behind Molly's good ear. "We always knew we were just borrowing her." The truth of it settled over the yard like golden hour light. In the months since running away, Finn had slept under bridges and in bus stations, had eaten from dumpsters, and worn the same clothes until they stood on their own. But here was living proof that not everything good had been lost, that some loves could survive separation, could cross state lines and foster homes and the aching stretch of time. Molly seemed determined to personally erase every bad memory, with her tongue alternating between licking Finn's face and shoving her head under his arm possessively. When he finally managed to sit up, she planted herself squarely in his lap, her weight an anchor against the emotional tide threatening to pull him under. The late afternoon sun caught the silver in her muzzle that hadn't been there before, the new freckles on her pink nose. She was older, they both were. Finn exhaled shakily, pressing his forehead to Molly's. Her breath smelled terrible in that familiar, comforting way, like the rawhide chews she'd always hoarded under his childhood. "Bed." When he spoke, the words vibrated against her warm fur. "I guess I'm staying." Molly responded by sneezing directly in his face, then immediately licking his nose in apology. Mrs. Harrison laughed wetly, swiping at her eyes with the dish towel. From the porch, Mr. Harrison nodded approvingly before disappearing inside, returning moments later with Molly's favorite ratty tennis ball and the hand-knitted sweater. She refused to sleep without Dot, as the screen door squeaked shut behind them. Finn finally noticed the details of Molly's life here. The custom food bowl with her name painted in clumsy kindergarten letters, done by the Harrisons' granddaughter. He'd later learn the perfectly worn spot on the porch swing, where she clearly napped in sunbeams. These people had loved her well. The realization loosened something tight in his chest. Molly, sensing the shift, scrambled up to plant both paws on his shoulders, her entire body trembling with the effort of containing her. Joy. Finn caught her effortlessly, the motion muscle memory after years of practice. In that moment, with golden light filtering through the oak leaves and Molly's tail thumping rhythmically against his ribs, Finn understood he wasn't just reclaiming his dog, he was reclaiming the part of himself that believed in second chances, in coming home, in being loved despite all the ways life had taught him not to expect it. The walk back would take twice as long, with Molly straining at her leash to sniff every bush and pee on every vertical surface, her collar jingling like the world's happiest tambourine. Finn didn't mind. For the first time in months, he wasn't running towards something or away from it. He was walking beside, matching his pace to the four-legged creature who'd never stopped waiting for him. Home wasn't a place anymore. It was this: the warm press of a familiar paw against his palm, the shared rhythm of their breathing as the sidewalk stretched before them, the unshakable certainty that no matter what came next, they'd face it together. After Molly came home, the house breathed differently, fuller, brighter, like the walls themselves had been waiting for her return. She followed Finn everywhere, small, scruffy shadow with perpetually muddy paws and a tail that never stopped moving. It wagged against chair legs, thumped against door frames, sent loose papers fluttering from low tables with its relentless, joyful rhythm. At night, her claws clicked across the hardwood floors in a familiar cadence: tap, tap, tap. Pause, tap, tap. She checked each room before settling at the foot of Finn's bed. Some nights, when the house was quiet and the moon cast long shadows through the curtains, I'd catch the murmur of Finn's voice through his bedroom door. No longer the desperate whispers of a boy begging the universe for proof this is real, right? But steady, quiet words, stories about their years apart, promises for tomorrow. Sometimes just her name, spoken like a secret only they knew. Molly, but the back door still opened on its own. Every few nights, like some stubborn ghost refusing to be laid to rest. I'd wake to the soft creak of hinges, the whisper of cold air sliding across the floorboards. I'd find Sam sitting sentinel in the doorway, ears pricked toward the darkness beyond. But unlike before, he didn't cross the threshold, just turned his head to glance down the hall where Finn and Molly slept, then padded to my side with a quiet whine, his warm weight pressing against my leg as if to say, "You feel it too, don't you?" One evening in late summer, we sat on the porch watching Molly chase fireflies through the tall grass. Her paws kicked up puffs of dust that glittered in the golden hour light, her barks sharp and bright as firecrackers. Finn absently scratched behind her ears when she circled back to us, his fingers finding the old scar above her eyebrow, the one she'd gotten as a pup trying to climb a chain-link fence. "It's not her," he murmured suddenly, his voice low. "Molly's here, so why is it still happening?" The question hung between us, weighted with all the things we never talked about, the way Finn still startled at slamming doors, how he always took the seat closest to the exit, the nightmares that sometimes sent him pacing the house at 3 a.m. with Molly pressed against his side. I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. Maybe it's not about her. Finn's fingers stilled in Molly's fur. She nudged his wrist impatiently until he resumed petting, but his gaze stayed fixed on the horizon where the sun dipped below the tree line. "Maybe it's about you," I continued, watching the first stars blink to life overhead. "About feeling like you don't belong like this." I gestured to the house, the yard, the three of us tangled together on the creaky porch steps. "Might disappear if you blink." Finn was quiet for so long, I thought he might not answer. The cicadas filled the silence with their electric hum, and Molly sighed contentedly, her chin dropping onto his knee. When he finally spoke, his voice was so soft the breeze nearly stole it away. "I do now," that night. For the first time, the door stayed shut. The library card application sat between us on the kitchen table, its crisp white edges already softening under Finn's nervous fingers. He'd filled it out with painstaking precision, printing his new address in block letters, tracing over the date twice until the ink nearly bled through the paper. Molly lay across his feet, her chin propped on his sneaker, as if anchoring him. "To the moment, you sure you don't want me to come with?" I asked, nudging the car keys toward him. Finn shook his head, tucking the application into his back pocket with a resolve that made my chest tighten. "We'll walk," he said, snapping his fingers from Molly. The dog bounded up instantly, her tail whacking against the table leg in excitement. "She needs the exercise anyway." I watched from the window as they made their way down the sidewalk, Finn's shoulders squared beneath his thrift store plaid shirt, Molly trotting proudly at his side with her leash dangling unused. They paused at the corner where the oak tree's roots had buckled the pavement, Finn automatically bending to check Molly's paws for burrs, just like I'd taught him. The morning sun caught the copper highlights in his hair, the same shade as Molly's, scruffy fur where it brushed against his jeans. The library's automatic doors whooshed open to reveal Ms. Kowalski behind the circulation desk, her silver-streaked braid swinging as she looked up from her computer. Her eyes crinkled at the corners when she spotted Finn hesitating in the entryway. Molly pressed reassuringly against his leg. Well, if it isn't my favorite Chibuka Week patron, she called, waving them over. The library had become Finn's sanctuary. These past months, the one place he could disappear into the stacks for hours without anyone asking questions or casting pitying glances. Today, the usual smell of old paper and lemon-scented polish seemed to steady him as he approached the desk. Molly immediately flopped onto the cool tile, her tail thumping as Ms. Kowalski produced a dog biscuit from her cardigan pocket. "Application day, huh?" she asked, accepting the slightly crumpled paper Finn handed over. He nodded, fingers drumming against his thighs until Molly shifted to lean against him. The librarian's keyboard clacked loudly in the quiet building, punctuated by the squeak of her chair as she turned to retrieve something from the printer. When she presented the finished card, it was with the gravitas of a knighthood ceremony. "Congratulations, Mr. Callahan. You're officially our youngest regular." Her wink took any sting from the teasing that comes with privileges. First pick of new arrivals, extended checkout periods. She lowered her voice conspiratorially, and I might look the other way if a certain terrier wants to visit the children's corner. Finn's flush crept all the way to his ears, but his grip on the card was sure. I'd seen that look before, when he'd nailed his first ollie at the skate. When Molly had finally mastered stay after weeks of training, the quiet pride of something earned. He made straight for the fantasy section, Molly's nails clicking against the linoleum as she trailed him. I lingered by the new releases, watching as he ran his fingers along the spines with practiced ease. The Hobbit came first, its cover more worn than the others, clearly a favorite. Then a surprise, a glossy manual on positive reinforcement dog training that he studied with intense focus before adding to his pile. At checkout, Ms. Kowalski raised an eyebrow at the selection, but said nothing beyond reminding him of the due date. Finn tucked the books carefully into his backpack, the library card secured in his front pocket where he could check its presence like a talisman. Molly sniffed at the bag's straps as we exited, as if approving his choices. The drive home should have been unremarkable. Just another errand run, another Tuesday afternoon. But then Finn rolled down his window all the way, letting the late summer air rush through the car in a riot of honeysuckle and cut grass. Molly stood with her front paws on the center console, ears flapping comically in the wind as Finn scritched behind her collar. "Maybe I could volunteer there," he said suddenly, raising his voice over the roar of air. Ms. Kowalski said they need help shelving books on weekends. I glanced over in time to see the breeze tugging at his hair, the sunlight catching the gold flecks in his eyes. No hesitation, no guardedness, just a kid making plans for a future he'd started believing might actually include him. "Yeah," I said, grinning so wide my cheeks ached. "I think you'd be great at that." Molly chose that moment to sneeze directly into Finn's ear, making us both laugh. As we turned onto our street, Finn didn't immediately roll up the window like he usually did when approaching the house. That old instinct to make himself smaller, less noticeable. Instead, he left it down, letting the neighborhood sounds wash over us. Mr. Peterson's lawnmower, the Alvarez kids playing basketball, the ice cream truck's distant jingle. The library card sat on the kitchen counter that evening while Finn read aloud to Molly from The Hobbit, her head cocked at the voices he did for each character. Every so often, he'd pause to show her an illustration, her wet nose leaving smudges on the pages he'd smooth away with exaggerated exasperation. Through the window over the sink, I could see the first stars appearing, the same ones that had watched over Finn during those long nights alone that had guided him home to us later. when I passed his half-open door on my way to bed. The glow of his desk lamp spilled into the hallway. Finn sat cross-legged on his rug, carefully copying the library's volunteer application onto fresh paper after Molly had stepped on his first attempt with muddy paws. His tongue poked out in concentration, the way it had when he was learning. To write his name in my checkbook, register those first shaky weeks. Molly watched from her nest of blankets, her chin propped on his knee as his pen scratched across the page. When he finished, Finn held the application up for her inspection. She gave it a perfunctory sniff before licking his wrist in approval, making him laugh softly, a sound that had become as natural in our home as the creak of the floorboards or the whistle of the tea kettle. I backed away quietly, leaving them to their moment. The library card still lay on the counter where Finn had left it, its plastic surface gleaming under the kitchen lights. Such a small thing, really. Just a rectangle of laminated paper with a barcode and his name typed neatly beneath the library's logo. But also so much more. A key that had unlocked something in him, a promise that he belonged somewhere beyond the margins. Tomorrow, we'd return to the library together, so Finn could submit his application in person. Ms. Kowalski would probably already have the volunteer badge waiting behind the desk, knowing her. Molly would doze in the children's section, while Finn reshelved biographies with the same careful attention he gave everything these days. And when we left, the automatic doors would whoosh shut behind us, but Finn wouldn't look back the way he used to, like he expected the ground to disappear beneath his feet at any moment. He'd just walk forward, Molly trotting proudly at his side, the weight of his library card a steady presence in his pocket. A reminder that some stories do get second chapters, that sometimes, against all odds, lost things find their way home. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more Fireside Telestories. So, share your own stories of animals in the comments below us. A pet ever helped you through a difficult time? How do they show you the way forward when you couldn't see it yourself?